I used to believe that pain only came from strangers, that the world outside my home was where the real danger lived. But I was wrong. The deepest wounds aren't inflicted by enemies, they're carved by the people who should have protected you. I learned that the day my own family looked me in the eyes and decided I wasn't worth keeping. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't argue. They simply dismissed me, as if my existence was nothing more than a burden waiting to be tossed aside. Their words didn't just sting. They settled into my bones, heavy and cold, shaping every breath I took. I remember standing there, shocked by how quickly someone's entire world can collapse. One sentence, one moment, and suddenly you're outside the life you thought was yours. But what they didn't know was that the part of me they tried to break, the part they called weak, foolish, worthless, was the part that refused to die. Something inside me tightened, hardened, and began to grow. Not anger, not even hatred. Something stronger, something sharper. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of everything. The beginning of the rise they never saw coming. The beginning of the empire they would one day be forced to bow to. And it all started with the question I asked myself that night. If they could erase me so easily, what would happen when I returned stronger than they ever imagined? Before everything fell apart, my life looked simple from the outside. Ordinary, steady, almost predictable. I wasn't rich, I wasn't powerful, and I certainly wasn't someone anyone would expect to rise to anything greater. But I had routines that grounded me and dreams that quietly shaped my days. I woke early each morning, long before the sun settled over the city, and sat by the small window in my room, watching the streets wake up. It was the one moment of peace I allowed myself, a brief pause before the day began pulling me in every direction. Work wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. A modest position at a small design firm, tucked between a bakery and an old bookstore that always smelled like dust and stories. I wasn't a leader, but I wasn't invisible either. I was building something slowly, piece by piece, hoping one day it would lead me somewhere better. I held on to that hope tightly, especially on the days when doubt whispered a little too loudly. My family, well, that part of my life wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile, at least not openly. We functioned like a machine built from worn-out parts, barely holding together, always on the edge of breaking. I tried not to expect too much from them, telling myself that some families simply didn't know how to show love. Still, deep inside, a part of me longed for even the smallest sign that I mattered. I clung to every rare moment of softness, convincing myself it was enough. Evenings were where I found my joy. I'd walk home through streets buzzing with life, the glow of neon lights reflecting off windows and puddles. Sometimes I stopped at the bakery for a treat. Other times I explored different corners of the city, imagining the future I wanted, a future where I wasn't just surviving but living. My friends teased me for dreaming too big, but they didn't understand how much I needed to believe in something better. Looking back, there were signs, tiny cracks forming long before the final break. A shift in tone when I entered a room. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached. The way my family seemed irritated by my presence, even when I'd done nothing at all. I brushed it off as stress, as coincidence, never imagining it was something darker threading itself into the fabric of my life. At that time, I still believed loyalty meant something. I believed that hard work would eventually be recognized, that kindness would be returned, that people, especially family, would choose to stand with you when life became heavy. But beliefs can be dangerous when they blind you. I didn't realize that some people see kindness as weakness and loyalty as something they can twist to their advantage. There were nights when I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling, as if the ground beneath me had begun to shift, subtle but persistent. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking I was imagining it. I told myself I was overreacting, that nothing was wrong, that I was safe within the life I had built. I didn't know those moments were warnings, small echoes of the storm that was already forming around me. I kept moving forward, unaware of how close I was to the edge. My days blended together. Work, home, dreams, little victories, small disappointments, all building towards something I couldn't yet see. I didn't realize that the life I was clinging to so tightly was about to be ripped away, not by strangers, but by the very people who should have helped me rise. If I had known what was coming, maybe I would have prepared myself. Maybe I would have asked harder questions, paid closer attention, and guarded my heart more carefully. But I didn't. I walked straight into the betrayal that would change everything, believing the world I lived in was solid. I didn't know yet that this was the calm before the fracture, the moment right before everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and worth would shatter beyond recognition. I used to believe that life unraveled slowly, that disasters gave you signs before they struck, that betrayal arrived with warning whispers or shadows moving at the edges of your vision. But mine didn't. It came abruptly, violently, tearing through everything I thought was secure. And the strange part is, it didn't begin with something big. It began with something painfully small. One evening, after an unusually long day at work, I walked into my family's house expecting the usual indifference. Instead, I stepped into a silence that felt staged, too dense, too deliberate, like they had vacuumed the air out of the walls. They stood in the living room, their faces blank, their bodies stiff, their eyes refusing to meet mine. I felt it before they even said the words. Something had shifted, and whatever it wasn't in my favor. They didn't yell. They didn't reason. They simply told me to leave. Not for a few days. Not until things settled. They wanted me out for good. Their explanation was shallow, like they hadn't rehearsed it enough times. You're holding us back. We can't support you anymore. You need to figure your life out on your own. Words that sounded almost logical until you realized the venom behind them wasn't frustration, it was something darker. Detachment. Disgust. Finality. I stood there frozen, trying to understand how the people I'd spent years trying to please could dismiss me with such simple cruelty. I thought there had to be some misunderstanding. Surely no one makes a life-altering decision without reason. Surely my own family wouldn't throw me away like trash. But the truth was harsher. They already had. They had packed my things. My clothes. My documents. Even the small souvenirs and notes I had kept to remind myself I was loved at least once. All stuffed into boxes carelessly, as if none of it had ever meant anything. As if I had never meant anything. That night, I walked out with nothing but those boxes and the hollow echo of their apathy in my ears. I remember the sting of the cold air, the burn of tears I refused to let fall, the numbness that spread through me as I watched the house shrink behind me. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel possible. Betrayal never does at first. But my story didn't end at the curb. It started there. A few days later, when my mind was still foggy and my heart still too raw, I discovered what had truly happened. It wasn't about finances. It wasn't about space. It wasn't even about my life, my choices, or the person I was becoming. It was about convenience, their convenience. A decision that benefited them, one they had been planning long before they pretended to care. A relative I barely spoke to slipped up during a phone call meant for someone else. An overheard conversation. A hushed tone, a name whispered that made my stomach twist. I listened from a distance as she talked about my family getting rid of the dead weight so they could finalize a business arrangement more easily. A partnership they had secured with people who didn't want extra obligations attached. I wasn't a daughter to them. I wasn't a sister. I wasn't blood. I was an obstacle. I learned that my entire life inside that house, the sacrifices I made, the help I offered, the love I tried so desperately to earn, had been nothing but a placeholder for them. Temporary, disposable, replaceable. My heart cracked, but my mind ignited. Anger didn't come first. Shock did. Then disbelief. Then a collapse of every memory I once held close. Because when you learn the truth, every kind smile turns sour, every quiet moment becomes suspicious, and every piece of love you thought you received feels counterfeit. But after the shock faded, something stronger rose beneath the surface, something sharp, determined, and unyielding. I didn't know what it was at first, but I felt it pulsing in my chest, growing with every breath. A force I'd never known, a fire I had never allowed myself to fuel. They thought throwing me away would break me. Instead, it built me. With nowhere to go, I found temporary shelter in a friend's small apartment. She offered me a couch and silence, the kind that gives you space to breathe. And in that silence, my mind began to work differently. I stopped thinking like a victim and started seeing patterns, opportunities, cracks in the world I had ignored for far too long. I needed money. I needed stability. I needed a plan. But more than anything, I needed purpose. And life, in its strange, almost cruel timing, delivered an opportunity one never expected. The design firm where I worked had recently begun losing clients. They were falling behind in a market that moved faster than they could handle. People whispered that we'd shut down soon. But I saw something else, potential no one else had the courage or clarity to recognize. I began staying late, studying the gaps competitors had left open. I explored tools, resources, and platforms most people ignored. I taught myself skills no one thought I could ever master. Desperation can teach you more in 3 months than comfort can teach you in 10 years. I absorb everything: marketing, branding, digital architecture, client psychology. I started taking independent projects quietly, using the little money I had saved to buy software and tools secondhand. I worked from the couch, from the firm, from coffee shops, from anywhere that allowed me to push forward. And soon results came. My first client was hesitant but satisfied. The next person was impressed. The one after that referred to 2 more. Within months, the small experimental designs I created began circulating online, gaining attention from people who had never even heard my name. The firm started noticing, too, but not in the way you'd hope. Instead of support, they demanded credit. Instead of encouragement, they pushed boundaries. Instead of gratitude, they questioned my loyalty. It was almost laughable. I had escaped one toxic environment only to be welcomed into another, one that wanted to benefit from my growth without acknowledging the pain that had forged it. But this time I was different. This time, I wasn't going to let anyone use me. So I left. Quietly. Efficiently. Without explanations or apologies. And with the clients who trusted me, I started something that would later become the foundation of my ascent. A small agency, just me, a laptop, and a future shaped by the determination to never be thrown away again. Every day, I pushed harder. Every setback fueled me. Every discouraging voice reminded me why I couldn't afford to stop. And slowly, opportunities began turning into contracts. Contracts became partnerships. Partnerships became networks. Networks became influential. It was around this time, when my life started moving upward, that I saw my family again, not in person but in a news article. Their partnership had collapsed. Their business deal had failed. Their finances were crumbling. The very people they betrayed me for had abandoned them the moment things turned complicated. They were drowning, and they had no one left to cling to. For a moment, just a tiny one, I felt pity. But it dissolved quickly. Because I knew something they didn't. My rise had just begun. Their downfall, that was only the beginning. And what I uncovered next, something buried deep, something they never expected anyone to find, changed everything about the revenge I thought I wanted. It shifted from emotional to strategic, from personal to powerful, from painful to inevitable. But of course, they didn't know any of that yet. They didn't know that I was watching. They didn't know that I was rising. They didn't know that the person they had dismissed as worthless was slowly gaining power far beyond anything they had ever imagined. The question wasn't whether I would strike back. It was only a matter of when. And the moment that opportunity finally came, it hit so perfectly, so poetically, that even I couldn't have predicted the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Everything was aligning. Everything was shifting. Everything was leading me directly to the moment they would regret the day they pushed me out. And they had no idea what was coming next. None at all. The moment everything shifted happened on a morning that felt almost too calm for what was about to unfold. The sky was clear, the city quieter than usual, and for a second, I wondered if fate was giving me a chance to turn back. But I had come too far, climbed too high, and uncovered too much to hesitate now. Revenge wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a path I had carved with my own broken hands, and today, I would walk it to the end. I had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering every document, every loophole, every law they had violated in their desperate attempts to save themselves. Their business failures weren't just unlucky, they were dishonest. Illegal shortcuts, hidden debts, false signatures. A web of lies so tangled that the slightest tug could bring the whole structure crashing down. And I was about to pull it. My empire had grown quietly, steadily, until I had connections in places my family never imagined I would reach. The same people who once dismissed me as background noise now responded to my calls with urgency. When I requested a meeting with the city officials to present what I had discovered, they cleared their schedules. It wasn't just that the information mattered, it was that I mattered. Walking into that building, I felt every version of myself overlapping. The girl they abandoned, the woman who refused to stay broken, the strategist who had risen from the edges of nothing. I wasn't the same person they had thrown away. Not anymore. When the officials reviewed the evidence, their faces hardened. Each page tightened the noose around my family's collapsing empire. The signatures were damning. The transactions are undeniable. The pattern is unmistakable. By the end of the meeting, they informed me of what would happen next. Audits, investigations, public hearings, freezes on assets. My family had spent years believing they were untouchable. Today, they would learn otherwise. But the real turning point hadn't arrived yet. It came when I stood outside the same house they had kicked me out of, now wrapped in legal notices and warnings. The grass was overgrown, the windows covered with temporary boards, the once proud building sagging under the weight of their failures. I hadn't bought it yet. Not then. But I was about to. I watched from across the street as my family walked out, their faces pale with panic, their voices sharp with blame. They had no idea I was there. They had no idea that everything happening to them traced back to me, the worthless one. The one they underestimated until it was too late. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave them to the consequences they had earned. But another part, the part that had been shaped by their cruelty, needed them to know. I needed them to see who I had become. I needed them to feel the echo of the pain they had given me. And so I stepped forward. They didn't recognize me at first. My clothes, my posture, my confidence, nothing matched the girl they had discarded. But when they finally realized who I was, the shock in their eyes was almost overwhelming. They opened their mouths to speak, but I didn't need to hear their excuses. I didn't need their half-hearted apologies or sudden attempts at affection. Instead, I handed them the official notice confirming the final foreclosure of the house, signed by me. Not only had their business collapsed, not only had their deals crumbled, but now the home they had chosen over me belonged to me. For a moment, time froze. Their hands trembled as they held the paper. Their eyes shifted between the notice and my face, disbelief turning into something more raw. Fear. Not of me, but of what I represented. The life they could have been part of. The success they could have shared. The daughter they threw away became the one person they could no longer escape. And still, the climax wasn't complete. Not yet. Because as they stood there speechless, the city officials' cars pulled up behind me, ready to enter the property and begin their assessment. Reporters, tipped off about the investigation, gathered at the end of the street. Cameras flashed. Microphones lifted. Questions flew through the air like sparks. This wasn't just a private downfall, it was a public collapse. My family looked around, overwhelmed, exposed, their reputation unraveling in real time. And then their eyes landed on me again, steady, unshaken, unafraid. They finally understood. I wasn't just taking back what they stole. I was rewriting the story they tried to bury me in. Taking a breath, I stepped closer, close enough for them to feel the steadiness in me, the resolve that had taken years to build. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain. My presence alone was everything they once believed I'd never possess. Strength, power, worth. The world they built on lies was falling apart, and I was standing in the center of it, calm, controlled, victorious. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unwanted. I didn't feel afraid. I felt in control. And as my family's world collapsed in front of them, as the cameras captured every second, as the officials announced the next steps in the investigation, I realized something even more shocking than the revenge I had orchestrated. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something even bigger. Because everything that happened next, everything that would shape the rest of my life, would be built on this moment, this turning point, this reclamation of power. And as I turned away from them, leaving them standing in the ruins of their choices, one final thought echoed in my mind. If this was what my rise looked like, what would the world say about what came after? I used to think revenge was a moment, one explosive instant where everything that hurt me would finally make sense. But standing there, watching the last piece of my plan fall perfectly into place, I realized something I never expected. Revenge isn't a moment. It's a journey. And the journey leaves footprints on your soul, whether you want them or not. When my family called me worthless, when they looked me in the eyes and told me I'd never become anything, something inside me cracked. Not broken, just cracked enough for the light to get out. That light became my drive, my courage, my obsession, and eventually my empire. But after everything, after buying their house, after taking control of the city they once ruled, after becoming the woman they told me I could never be, I found myself alone in the quiet of my new life, wondering why victory felt so strangely hollow. Don't get me wrong. Winning tasted sweet. It tasted like justice dipped in gold. But the sweetness faded quicker than I expected. Because when the dust settled, there was no audience clapping, no hero's parade. Just me, and the echo of every moment that had brought me there. I thought revenge would erase the pain. Instead, it highlighted it. It brought out the scars I thought I'd buried. It forced me to confront the truth that even after everything I'd done, even after proving them wrong in ways they never imagined, there was still a part of me that remembered the girl who cried silently at night, waiting for someone to believe in her. And that was the part one hadn't prepared to face. The night I handed them the eviction notice, my hands didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. I was calm, eerily calm. I'd spent years imagining how I'd feel when the moment finally came. I expected rage, tears, maybe even satisfaction, so intense it would feel like fire. But instead, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. Not triumph. Not bitterness. Just clarity. I finally understood that revenge had never been about hurting them. It had always been about freeing myself. They thought they were breaking me. But every insult, every dismissal, every moment they made me feel invisible, it all built the woman who stood before them that day. A woman unrecognizable even to myself. And watching their faces twist in shock, watching them confront the truth they'd avoided for years, that the girl they'd thrown away had become the woman who now owned everything they valued, gave me a sense of closure I didn't think was possible. But closure isn't peace. Peace requires something deeper. In the days that followed, I waited for guilt to hit me. It didn't. I waited for joy to stay. It didn't. Instead, I felt this strange mix of relief and sadness, like I had finished a long chapter of a book I never wanted to read in the first place. People romanticize revenge. They paint it as empowerment, as justice, as victory. But they never talk about what it asks from you. They never talk about the sleepless nights, the second-guessing, the isolation you willingly step into because no one understands the fire you've chosen to walk through. Revenge isn't free. It demands your time, your focus, your energy, sometimes even your innocence. And when it's over, you're not the same person you were before. You're someone new, someone harder, sharper, maybe stronger, but also someone who has lost the softness they once carried effortlessly. But here's the thing. I don't regret it. Not for a second. I needed to win, not because I wanted to destroy them, but because I wanted to rebuild myself. I wanted to take back my narrative. I wanted to step out of the shadow they cast over my life and show the world, and myself, what I was capable of. And I did. But what surprised me the most after everything was how quickly the world moved on. My victory didn't change the universe. It didn't rewrite history. It didn't suddenly make people kinder. It didn't give me some magical sense of completion. What it gave me was truth. The truth that healing isn't a destination. It's a choice. One you have to make repeatedly, even after the revenge is done. In my quietest moments, I realized something powerful. My revenge story wasn't about my family. It was about me. They were just the catalyst. I was on fire. The impact of everything I did lives in the way I carry myself now, in the confidence I earned, not inherited, in the boundaries I built, in the respect I demand, in the softness I'm slowly rediscovering. It lives in the messages from people who see my story and whisper, "I wish I had the strength to do what you did." It lives in the conversations the story sparks, in the discussions about justice, dignity, resilience, and what happens when someone finally stands up for herself after being torn down for so long. My revenge didn't heal me, but it liberated me. And liberation is worth every scar. I learned that justice doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like reclaiming what was taken from you. Sometimes it looks like building a throne from the rubble someone else left behind. Sometimes it looks like walking away, not because you're weak, but because you've finally realized your worth. We all crave closure. We all want to believe that once the wrong is righted, everything will fall into place. But revenge doesn't offer that kind of simplicity. It asks you who you want to be when the dust settles. And now that mine has settled, I choose to be a woman defined not by what was done to her, but by what she built afterward. So here's what I want you, the listener, to take from my story. Revenge may light the fire inside you, but only you can decide what you'll do with the ashes. Will you let them bury you? Or will you rise from them? Because that choice is what truly defines us. And before you click away, ask yourself this. If you had the chance to rewrite your own ending, would you choose revenge? Or would you choose something even more powerful?